Hello and welcome to Sticky from the Inside, the podcast that explores how to build stickier, competition-smashing, consistently successful organisations from the inside out. I'm your host, Andy Goram, and I'm on a mission to help you turn the lights on behind the eyes of your people, light the fires within them, and help more of us lead successful, fulfilling work lives. This podcast is for anyone who believes that's worth going after and who's curious about what really drives people, culture and performance. Each episode, we dive into the ideas and conversations that help create what I call stickier businesses, places where people thrive and love to work and where customers stay, recommend you and love what you do and why you do it. So, if you want to take the tricky out of being sticky, listen on. Okay then, have you ever walked out of a meeting replaying the conversation over and over in your head thinking, why didn't I just say it? Not because you didn't have an opinion, not because you didn't know the answer, but because for some reason in that moment, something stopped you. Perhaps it was fear. Perhaps there was politics at play. Perhaps you were worried about how your challenge or interjection could be received. Or maybe you simply convinced yourself that it just wasn't worth the risk. Whatever the reason, most of us have experienced that moment where silence somehow feels safer than speaking up. Now, my guest today has spent years helping leaders understand exactly why that happens. Corinne Gavlinski is the founder and CEO of the Gav Group. And they work with senior leaders and executive teams to help them influence more effectively, navigate complex relationships, and create the conditions where better conversations can happen. And here's why I wanted Corinne on the show today. Corinne doesn't just believe that this is simply about managing up effectively. She believes it's about something much deeper: courage, understanding why you want to influence in the first place, knowing when to challenge, knowing how to challenge, and perhaps most importantly, having the confidence to find your voice in those situations without losing yourself in the process. So today, I want to try and explore why so many capable people still often stay quiet, why asking for help can still feel really uncomfortable for many of us, especially senior executives. And I really want to look at vulnerability. Is it being perceived differently now? Are we changing our mind about how vulnerability shows up in leadership? And does that in any way influence other things? And somewhere along the way, I'm hoping that Corinne is going to share a story with you that she shared with me about one meeting she'll never forget that changed the way that she thinks about leadership forever. So here we go. Corinne, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Andy. It's a delight to be here.
It's great to see you. For me personally, this feels like a conversation, long time coming. We spoke a long time ago about recording something together, and we're finally doing it, which is
Finally
wonderful.
Here.
Before we start getting into this lovely topic of leadership and challenging up, and maybe the cost of staying silent in those situations, you do me a little favor, Corinne. Could you introduce yourself to the audience? Tell us a little bit about you and where your focus is today.
Absolutely. I had the very good fortune, Andy, to start my career in organizations that really invested in young leadership talent. That doesn't happen so much anymore these days. So I sound like a dinosaur when I say it, but that's the truth. I was put through paces. I was placed in departments where other leaders were modeling behavior for me. I was rapidly provided feedback in my young career about what I was doing right and what I wasn't doing so right. And I had a real positive grooming, if you will, as a young leader. And I have to be quite honest, I didn't really see it for the benefit it truly was at the time. I never really appreciated it enough. But now, 20 some odd years later, I look back and think, gosh, what a tremendous upbringing I had in my career. That led to a succession of pivots in my life after a couple of identity jolts, one of which was, not my choice and one of which was my choice. So I moved from financial services into healthcare. I worked for startups and large publicly traded companies. I found that I was very good with clients, so I typically had very client-facing roles and ultimately led sales and account management teams for most of my career.
Mhm.
And so at some point, I made yet a third pivot and decided to get out of this crazy corporate world. And today, I help executives solve big problems. I work with executives at the senior level who are really struggling with a couple things. Either politics in the workplace that are hindering their ability to have bigger impact,
Mhm.
or they're exhausted
Mhm. Mhm.
by whatever's happening in their organization. And usually that has something to do with not just the pace, but more often I find it has to do with how decisions are made in the organization.
Sure.
So we work on that.
Okay. Now, I can't get this out of my head. Firstly, let's just chop back. I do love it when guests use little phrases that make me think about. I love the whole thing. Identity jolts. That's
Yeah.
great. I like that.
Yeah.
I'm gonna keep that if I may. Um,
Yes, you may.
the
Yes, you
second
may.
the second thing is when we first spoke about talking together, you told me a story, like a pivotal moment for you in your career that made you reconsider, I guess, what leadership was about. Can you
Yeah.
tell us that story about that meeting?
Yeah. I had a meeting where I did speak up. You introduced our call today about how people need courage to speak up.
Mm,
This was an occasion where I spoke up and did not have my emotions in check.
okay.
And there were tremendous influences of politics involved in the room. And because I had not fully considered how I wanted to influence the conversation, what I wanted to say, and what the consequences might be of what I was saying, I instead let my emotions in the moment rule what was coming out of my mouth to my detriment.
Mm,
And I can remember someone calling me after that meeting and saying to me, basically, what the H was that? That's not who you normally are. What were you thinking?
mm,
And it pulled me up short, Andy.
yeah.
I was being chastised and I was unfamiliar with that feeling. I hadn't had that in a while. And I was embarrassed. And I was still angry and frustrated about the conversation, but now I had this new dimension of, "Oh my goodness, what have I done? Have I hampered my ability to be a leader, an effective leader in this organization? And yet I think I'm still right."
Yeah, yeah.
But maybe I didn't express being this concept of being right in the right way. That was perhaps one of the pivotal points where I started to realize, wow, I didn't really have someone that was safe or confidential enough to have conversations with in that organization where I could game out what I wanted to say, where
Mm,
I could consider how I wanted to have my influence. And, it was 20 plus years in, and what a shame that I was only recognizing that at that point in my career so far along instead of a decade sooner when it might have made a huge difference. So I tell that story because while I've had a very successful career on paper, it's been messy. I've
yeah,
made mistakes. There were times I was a terrible leader, case in point.
yeah.
And so today, the role that I play with these senior executive leaders, I allow them a safe space, a confidential space to work through what they want to say, to have the most influence, to manage their emotions in the moment so that they then are having the impact that they want to have. And they realize quickly that they don't have that person internally. And so seeking someone outside is a tremendous asset to them. And I wish I had had that asset when I was in my last role because it would have saved me an awful lot of embarrassment, and it would have allowed me to have that meeting that I just described to you be a whole lot more effective and not nearly as damaging.
I'm sure. What did you really learn about yourself in that moment?
You know, it gave me a lot of self-awareness, Andy.
Mhm,
I think, myself included, executives are often applauded, and rightly so, for the behaviors that they have that get things done,
mhm,
that move things forward,
mm.
that hit goals. And sometimes that comes with a dark side. And that dark side can sometimes be being a little ego driven,
Yeah, yeah,
you know, having some maybe bad behaviors around being overwhelming to some people, not incorporating others' feedback, kind of charging ahead with blinders on. And I think in that moment, it made me much more self aware of some of my own dark side behaviors, which is I'm very impatient sometimes. And it frustrates me when we have the same conversation over and over and over again. And people are conversing for purposes of hearing themselves talk rather than making decisions and moving
sure.
the activity forward, right?
Yeah.
So this is one of my um, darker side behaviors. And so what that illuminated for me is I could be much more effective if I was able to control that urge to become impatient.
Mhm.
And then the flip side of that is, and what else would be possible if I could control that urge,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah. Yeah,
So I think it was around my own being more self aware of my own behaviors, how they help, how they don't help.
yeah.
And it was a good reminder that I'm not all that, frankly.
Sometimes that's a great lesson to learn, right? We can
Sometimes
believe our
that's a
own
great
press.
lesson.
Yeah,
Yeah.
100%.
And sometimes executives need that, right?
Mm.
Um, They need someone. They have people telling them yes all day long. They have people, especially if they're very senior, there's very few people that speak truth to power and tell them, "No, that's a terrible idea." So I think that's why I'm effective in working with executive leaders, not just because I've sat in their shoes, or sat in their seats, so to speak, but because I match their intensity. I'm not afraid to tell them, "You've said that 3 times. What are you doing about that?"
Mm, mm.
'Cause it doesn't sound to me like you're doing anything about that.
I I
They
I
might
I
not like it,
I
but
can
they
s
sure do sit up straight and go, "Oh,
I can definitely sense that you would scare the bejesus out of me in some situations, Corinne. There's no question about that, right? And that's a good thing.
I'm
That's a
not
good thing.
afraid to be direct."
Yeah.
I'm not afraid to be
Well, I
direct,
think
and,
this is
I've appreciated people in my life that are direct with me, like the person that said, "What the H was that?"
I think this is the thing, right? Trying to combine the need for directness today and still not offend people and get them to do stuff
Yeah,
is a tricky thing for people
yeah.
to kind of get their head around, I think.
Yes, it is. And with multi-generations in the workforce, the way one generation would approach that is markedly different than another generation would receive it. And I think it's the testament of a really good leader when they can modulate directness with curiosity.
Yeah,
And very few leaders are taught how to be curious.
I like that. I wonder if we could just maybe rewind a little. Something
Mm,
that you said here about the people that you work with, the senior executives and what have you. I wonder whether your experience is going to help us out here because I think there's an element of your work, or for me at least, there's a connection to what you do in helping other people understand how to effectively challenge up. When you are, you just said speak truth to power. When you're trying to make a challenge with someone who has, let's be honest, a hierarchical seniority or whatever it might be, or a level of
yeah.
experience bigger than yours, why do you think so many capable, experienced people struggle with that whole notion of effectively challenging upwards? What is it about it that you
Mm,
see
mm.
holds them back?
This might be an unusual answer, but I don't think young leaders are taught time and place.
Mhm.
So, said another way, I don't think they are effective always at reading the room.
Mm.
There is a time and a place to challenge senior leadership and knowing when and being able to ascertain when is the right time and place is a skill that's really not well taught or not often taught.
Mhm.
And you usually don't learn it through teaching. You usually learn it by having someone else model the behavior for you or having a mentor who will be courageous enough to say to you, that wasn't your moment, and let me
Mhm.
tell you why, you know?
Mhm.
So that would be my first answer. The second answer is more about corporate culture, which is, something you might have expected me to say, which is that not every corporate culture embraces different ideas.
Mm.
Not every corporate culture makes it safe to fail.
Mhm.
Not every corporate culture welcomes input at multiple levels within the organization. So I think people are somewhat fearful of
Mhm.
being not so much reprimanded, but judged
Mm.
by what they might say in senior settings. And then the third thing is not knowing how to say it appropriately, you know? Mm,
Especially if they're emotionally led, right?
yes.
Maybe they're a young,
Yeah.
capable
Yep.
manager in a senior environment for the first time, and they're disagreeing, and they overplay their confidence
Yes. Yes.
and get it wrong, and the reaction isn't great. This is one of
Yep.
that lived experience moments that could then stop you doing that challenge again. Now, the challenge
Yeah.
itself may have been the right thing to do, but like you said,
Totally.
timing could be wrong, language could
Yeah.
be wrong,
Yeah.
even the way it's delivered could be wrong, and
Absolutely. Tone
that
of
then
voice.
shadows you. Yeah.
Tone of voice, absolutely. And that's where a senior leader really earns impact.
Mm.
If a senior leader in that scenario that you just described is willing to extend themselves and say to that younger leader, I appreciate what you had to say. Here's how I might offer for you to do that differently next time. And here's why. Let me tell you how I might have said it. Hugely impactful in a young leader's life. Because the simple truth is, Andy, you have to get it wrong at least once
Mm.
to learn it. Then you've really got to be willing to receive also. You've got to be willing to take a cold, hard look at yourself and say, maybe this isn't working for me. So that comes back to some self awareness. But I think when a young person does that, it's not immediately their fault, right? It is incumbent upon a more senior leader with experience to extend that help and say, hey, what you said was valuable. However, let me tell you why this place where you did it was maybe not the best. Your
Mm.
tone could have improved. You know, n- Otherwise, how does that person ever know? If they just get judged and perhaps um, they're seen differently or overlooked for other opportunities, they'll never understand or learn.
Yeah, I think that reading the room is a real skill, that definitely comes
Yes.
with experience. I don't think it's
Yes.
something naturally, unless you're a real empath. I don't necessarily think that's something people get. And I wonder whether this is where that whole influence play can be differentiated in that certain
Mhm.
situation. I think maybe where you have come from previously, maybe you're still dependent on some of that ego that you mentioned before,
Yeah.
as
Yeah.
opposed to, I think, realistically, when you move through some of those circles, actually, you now need to influence through a different method. So,
Yeah.
confidence and ego can get you so far, but actually, meaning and purpose behind the influence, I think that's what it takes as you move through an organization. Well, that's my theory anyway. I don't. How do you feel about that?
Yeah. I think intention is a big thing that we don't often communicate to one another,
Mm.
that I think we would be served well to share more often. You can share intention without having to be emotionally vulnerable. And
Sure.
what I mean by that is I think certain generations, mine included, are less comfortable being vulnerable. But if I can just help a leader to be more comfortable communicating intention, that usually meets someone who does appreciate vulnerability more than halfway. And so, what that might sound like is speaking with a person on my team once, I said to them, "We need to have a hard conversation today. My intent is to really help you grow, and I know what I'm gonna say is gonna sting a little, but my intention is I want you to know and understand it so that I can help you." That's not me being emotionally vulnerable as much as it's me stating what my intention is, and it takes the sting a little bit out of delivering some very direct feedback.
Yeah. That's all part of that showing up for the individual, right? That's showing that this
Totally
conversation
too.
is not just me chastising or whatever it might
Right,
be. This is a
right.
growth conversation. It's a coaching
Yes.
conversation. It's a support one.
Yes, but what did that take me? Less than 30 seconds to say?
Sure.
How many times does a senior executive really take the time to do that? Unless they are very intentional and very aware of their own skills and capabilities. Not often.
Yeah, I would say it's probably been rare in my experience. There's been some fantastic leadership
Yeah.
behavior that I've worked for,
Yep.
and they've definitely done that. And
Yes.
there's been others where they're much more direct without any
Yep.
emotion, without any connection. It's just
Yeah.
very
Yeah.
formulaic almost.
We don't really teach this in quote leadership school. We don't teach people to share intention. We teach them to give feedback. Well, if you're upset with the way something went and your emotion is probably, "Let me just tell this person what they did wrong so that they don't do it again,"
Sure.
without taking that extra couple of seconds to really think about, "What do I want this person to learn from this conversation? What do I want them to do next time, and how can I model that for them?" It's subtle, but it takes a couple of minutes, and you've got to remind yourself to do it.
Ah,
And
100%.
leaders that are self-aware, leaders that, work on their leadership tend to do it, and leaders who are just frankly going through the motions and doing their darndest to hit their goals aren't really doing it. And
Yeah.
that's not that they're bad people,
No, no,
right?
not
Just
necessarily.
coasting along.
Absolutely.
Yep.
I would say there are still some people who just don't give a shit. And
True, true,
and
true. I don't tend to work with those people.
no, 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 quite, right? I may have worked for some, but
Yes, indeed. I most certainly have worked for some.
I would love to just dig into what you said about vulnerability because I'm just interested in your perspective. We've talked about this topic quite a few times on this podcast, outside of the podcast, in the work that I get to do, in the rooms that I get to walk into. It happens more frequently. But in your experience, do you see a a tide change with leadership's relationship, understanding, use of vulnerability, or is it still not something that really shows up like the
Yeah,
press would have it say?
yeah. It's a great question. Andy, I'll caveat my answer by saying my clients tend to skew middle-aged,
Uh-huh.
45 to 50 plus, and are very senior leaders in their organization. Among those individuals, I think there's still quite a bit of work to be done.
Mm,
Though even the word vulnerability rarely is said in my conversations with
mm,
my clients.
mhm.
That said, I think younger generations crave some level of vulnerability. And perhaps, mm, I I came up in my career in a time when we didn't talk about vulnerability. We didn't
Mm.
talk about psychological safety. I'm a classic Gen Xer. You just push through and get the job done,
Yep.
right? And so my generation, I think, if I make a broad statement, has difficulty with the pause for emotion and vulnerability. Uh, We lack some skills,
Mm.
frankly, that I think younger generations have. But that doesn't mean we're without empathy. We just don't think of work in terms of the emotion or vulnerable side, and so I think we have quite a bit more work to do in this regard. I don't think it's as optimistic as the media would have us believe, yet there's a time and a place for vulnerability. I don't think it needs to be all the time or as much even as sometimes the media reports.
Mm.
And what I mean by that is and perhaps this is my generational bias coming out, but work is work. It is not meant to be your emotional support vehicle necessarily, in my opinion.
Mhm.
It is wonderful when you enjoy the people you work with and you enjoy the work you're doing and can leave the day feeling like you made an impact in whatever it is that your vocation is.
Mm.
I don't know that it needs to be the end all or the even major source of emotion and vulnerability in your life.
Mhm.
Again, that could be my generational bias coming out, but I think it is incumbent upon leaders to meet their people where they are, to demonstrate intention, and to demonstrate curiosity. And if I can help leaders do that, I think my personal belief is I think it meets more than halfway on this notion of vulnerability.
Yeah. I think there's a definition thing in vulnerability too. Look, I'm an Xer. I mean, I say without any bias intended at all. It's probably the greatest generation that the world's ever seen. I am joking, listeners. Right, I get it. Fine,
Yeah,
but I'm coming
I
from the
love
same
it.
place, right? Um,
Yeah, we totally are.
but I think this vulnerability thing can be conflated sometimes with a very heavy emotional downloading of how you're
Yeah,
feeling. Where for
yeah,
me, when I think of vulnerability, I'm thinking about the ability and the confidence somebody has to say, I don't think the same way. I don't get
yeah.
what you're saying. I might have a different perspective. Or most importantly, I think I need some help getting through this. I've got a
Mm,
problem. I don't have all the answers. Now, to
yeah,
me, they don't sound like overly emotional kind of
nope.
crutches to rely on, right? I think people get
Yeah,
vulnerability and sympathy and empathy all mixed up into some big bag of emotion. And when
yep,
I think of vulnerability like that, that's why I asked the question around senior leadership and a perceived block of
yeah,
being vulnerable. And I wonder whether it's in
yeah.
that misdiagnosis, misdefinition of it that's actually
Yes,
causing the
yes.
problem.
Excellent point. Excellent point. Yes, couldn't agree more. I think it absolutely is in that misaligned diagnosis or definition of what we mean. Um, you made me think of two others that I absolutely love and work with leaders on, which is this concept of saying, "I messed up.
Yeah,
I don't like the way I spoke to you yesterday. Can we have a do-over?" Or even better, I made a decision that I thought was right at the time, but now I have some different information and I need to make a different decision, and here's why.
perfect.
Yeah, right? That gets at the heart of what I think we mean when we say vulnerable without the emotional, here's how I feel about this.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
that is for me. That's great examples of what I feel vulnerability is about. I didn't write the definition of vulnerability. I'm not the world's expert on vulnerability. I just think I have a feeling that it's being overplayed in one area, that vulnerability is some big emotional load. And in other areas, that's scary for some people because it makes some sort of chink in the armor that they've been taught
Mhm.
that they need to have. People are looking at you. If you're not in control, if you're not fearless, if you're not full of courage all the
Yeah.
time, if you admit the fact you haven't got an answer, well, you're letting everybody down. That's bullshit. That
Yeah.
is not what
Yeah.
leadership is
Yeah.
about, I don't think.
No, no. But the more senior you become, the more that reality sets in, right?
Yeah,
Because the stakes are so much higher, and there genuinely is often no one else you can talk to. Think about, who does a CEO share his or her most vulnerable fears with about the decisions they're making, or about the team member that they think is not cutting it, or about the board pressure and how just exhausting that is. They can't share that with anyone, because to do so would be to admit weakness, and they can't, they feel as though they can't show that weakness or share that weakness.
but then I guess this is why the notion of a thinking partner or working with someone like you can be really beneficial for a senior leader. Weirdly, if we're going round in a circle here, the very fact of getting someone like you could be seen as vulnerability, right? Because I
Could
don't have
be,
all the answers, right?
could be.
And even in those conversations, however work directed they are, you're
Mhm.
going to bring issues to kind of work through. And the sharing of those issues
Yep.
is being vulnerable, right? So for
Yep.
me, it's kind of like ironic, the whole
It's full
thing.
circle. Yeah. Yeah. I think, I often talk about working with, someone like myself, a thinking partner, as a competitive advantage.
Mm,
I don't think of it as seeking help, right? If this is not therapy, we're gonna work through some stuff that's hard
mm.
and gnarly and politically charged, and we're gonna get to answers. You're gonna get into action. So I speak often about the fact that it's a competitive advantage. You should not An executive should not view it as, "I need help." They should view it as, "I want a competitive advantage, and I want to personally get better at what I do." What I do is hard to describe to people. I have often joked with my clients about how would they describe me. And it's funny, the men take a very dry approach. They're like, well, when I refer people to you, I just tell them, Corinne helped me with a problem like similar to what you're discussing with me or you're describing to me. You should talk to her.
Mm.
She'll really help you. And that's a very I mean, that undersells it quite a bit, but that's how I think sometimes people speak with one another, right? They don't say, "Well, I unloaded all this stuff on Corinne, and we diagnosed it, and we discussed it, and we came up with a" they don't that's not how people talk.
Mm.
Yeah.
I think
So
this is what's interesting about this whole arc I had in my head for this conversation around the cost of staying silent, because we're
mm,
flip flopping between leadership, regular people, and their attitudes towards speaking up in front of each other, but also challenging upwards inside organizations.
yeah, yeah,
And you've just brought it round to another area of actually the performance cost of staying silent on this stuff is not just
mhm,
about staying silent in the challenge in the room, it's actually staying silent on yourself, right?
yeah,
Is just not leaning into this stuff and pushing through.
correct, correct. So if you're someone who genuinely wants to advance and genuinely has ambition, um, not just for the sake of uh, financial gain, but because you actively are motivated to do more. I think being able to speak up is an absolutely critical skill.
Mm.
Absolutely critical. Even in the worst of corporate environments, you need to be able to do that, but you must understand time and place and context, like we've discussed, your tone of voice, and make darn sure what you're saying is meant to influence and is not riddled with emotion. And those are hard things to do. Those are hard things to figure out alone.
I think so, because you can't always see it. I don't care how self-aware you
Right.
are. We've all got little
Yeah.
blind spots, and we've also
Of
got
course we
things
do.
that we know we're
Of course we
doing. We really know we're doing them, but we won't be
Yeah,
honest to ourselves.
and we do them anyway. Yeah, we do them anyway. Yeah, and, I am a flawed leader still.
Hmm.
I can see in many of my clients qualities that exist in me, and it gives me such, um, God, dare I say the word joy? It gives me such joy, really, that I can get someone laughing with me about a behavior or a thing that we both do that is so counterintuitive to what we really want. And that bit of humor, that bit of sarcasm, perhaps, is just enough to crack the ice of getting someone to be able to laugh at themselves and then find a different way forward. And it doesn't mean they're going to do it perfectly, it means they're going to do it 8 times out of 10
Mm.
maybe. If we can just aspire to be a little bit better, those are the leaders that really go far, and they will help very young leaders do the same thing.
I love that. And by the way, you can absolutely have a license to use the word joy on this podcast. That's very
Uh,
much
you know,
allowed
it
and
it
encouraged.
it's not a word I use often, just like I don't use the word vulnerability very often. I don't use the word joy very often, but I this part of my career, this 3rd or 4th chapter that I'm on now, is really tremendously rewarding, and it's because my clients teach me every bit as much about myself as I teach them about themselves.
I love it.
And that's amazing.
Part of this conversation, I guess, for me is exploring this notion of finding your voice or being comfortable to even speak up and use that voice in whatever setting it is, leader or not, without
Yeah.
really losing who you are, which I think as we've started to
Yeah.
sort of unpick, right? I know that you've talked about influence, impact in those situations. It's a competitive edge and
Mm,
all those sorts of things. But I also know you have previously talked about 4 zones that leaders operate
mm,
in.
mm.
And I
Yeah.
think this is sort of definitely related to some of this, like finding yourself, finding your voice without losing yourself.
Yeah.
And just talk us through those sort of 4 zones that you reference in your
Yeah.
works. I think that's going to be really
Yeah.
useful.
The 4 zones are the impact zone, the chaos zone, the erosion zone, and the disengagement zone.
Yeah.
And those zones are just places I coined for places in your leadership that you may be at any given moment.
Hmm.
And as leaders, I believe we float in and out of them, right? You're never in one place for too long. And you're certainly never always in the impact zone, right? We wish we were, but we really aren't. And so, you know, this has everything to do with what is occurring in your environment in the moment, what is occurring for you in the moment, and where are you really sitting?
Mm.
And I believe that we should strive to be in the impact zone. And when we strive for that, we are more self aware. We are more strategic in terms of how we're leading, and we're not allowing the topic or the issue or emergency of the moment to override who we want to be as leaders.
Mhm.
And that's probably the most important thing
Yeah.
is continuously coming back to what kind of leader do I want to be? If I died tomorrow, how would I want people to describe me as a leader? And for people that I work with that tend to be more middle-aged, they start to worry about that. They start to worry about how am I perceived as a leader? Did I achieve the things that I thought I was going to achieve back when I was in my 20s? Um, and what kind of legacy am I really leaving here? And so it becomes a very rich conversation about, well, how do you want to be perceived? Do your actions even align with who you want to be? And if not, well, how do we get you there? The chaos zone is self-explanatory. You're just fighting fires all day long. You don't really have time to take a breath, let alone be strategic. And so you're really being ruled by the moment. Disengagement and erosion are a little more around apathy sometimes. So maybe you're just a little, mm, disenfranchised with the work you're doing and whether it really matters for you. Or it could be that your team's doing really well. They're hitting goal. They're fine. Like everything's kind of cranking along. There's not really much need for you to do too much more than that, or at least the belief that that's the case.
Mm.
And neither of those places are good places to hang out in. But you've got to recognize that you're in them first.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
so, it comes up in conversation with my clients about, well, where do you see yourself today? And, where do you want to spend more time? Or how do you want to reallocate how you spend your time in those zones? And how do we get you there quickly?
Because I think this is my point around whilst finding your voice, you don't want to lose yourself. So I think awareness of those zones and where you're playing and what gets you into those zones and how effective they are
Yeah.
is really useful. But also come back
Yeah.
to your point about your clients maybe being in that kind of middle-aged spectrum and thinking about their legacy or thinking about their leadership identity at that stage in their career. you know, what a great thing to think about at the early stage of your leadership career, right?
Yes.
If I can work
Yes.
out my identity early doors, then I have a helpful set of guardrails and guide rails to
Yeah.
use and stick within as I go through my career. And so for me, I
Yeah.
would encourage anybody listening to, find a
Yep.
thinking partner to help think through What is the
Yeah.
identity that I
Yeah.
want, right? And that doesn't have to be
Yep.
something crazy
Yep.
from what you already are. It might be absolutely concentrated on who you are today, but it might also identify some areas to grow and develop and pursue, right?
The pressure on young workers and leaders is so harsh to just get ahead,
Mm,
right? Climb the proverbial ladder. It starts as early as high school and college of you got to get to the next thing. There's this pressure to get to the next thing with very little reflection on what that thing means to you or what that thing will give you. Um, it's a shame, honestly, and I was the exact same way. All I was focused on was getting to the next level of my career, and for me, it was, yes, my own ambition, perhaps gone rogue, but it was also, an overexuberance of confidence that led me to just keep achieving and keep achieving and keep achieving, and what a shame that I didn't pick my head up sooner and say, "For what end?
mm, mhm,
How
mhm,
do I want to be perceived? How do I want others to view what I'm doing? And do I want influence? Do I want impact? And if so, how do I think about those things? What do those things mean to me? They
mm,
mean different things to different people.
yeah.
Um, yeah, what an amazing thing that that would have given me. Now, I will say, when you're younger in your career, it is easier to find peers to have that conversation with. There's less political navigation to do. It's less fraught with consequence, and it's easier to have those conversations. As you start to become a more senior leader, that peer set starts to erode, and you no longer have those enough confidential individuals that you can have those now harder conversations with, because often the more senior you become, you don't always trust that someone will keep your conversation confidential, and you're worried about who it might get around to or what might be said, right? There's a lot more at stake. And so young people should seek mentors, seek coaches if their organizations offer them, have peer conversations as much as they can, and really start to learn about themselves. And once you get to more senior levels, then I think it is very smart to seek someone outside your organization to have those conversations with. And that can be anyone, Andy. It doesn't have to be someone that, like myself, that's a thinking partner or an executive coach. It could be anyone, but I do recommend it's someone outside the organization.
I think that's really important. When I was introduced to my first exec coach back in, some years ago in my career, Hillary took me out of my comfort zone and made me look at stuff I'd
Mm.
already was aware of and pointed out a few things that I wasn't aware of. And that was the first time I think in my career, in my development area in that career, of properly leading into some things that if I'd been on my own, I would have ignored or I would have bypassed or I would have
Sure.
bailed out on. Being
Yeah.
held accountable for
Yeah.
behavior by someone
Yeah.
independent for the first time
Hard.
was a very, very, very different experience.
Hard and uncomfortable.
Yeah, and I
But
think
better you
that's
do it on your own terms than be caught out on it like
yeah,
I
yeah, yeah.
was in that meeting.
Great advice. I mean, and talking of advice, we've got to this part of the show, Corinne, where I'm looking for you to put three little bits of advice together for the listeners that we could fit on little sticky notes. We're not talking about
Yeah.
17 pages of deep, heartfelt notes here, just little sticky notes. So if we think about this
Yeah.
topic of giving people some practical advice for finding their voice without losing themselves, what would your
Mm.
advice be?
Yeah. Ooh, I love this. Um, Number one piece of advice would be to ask yourself, where can I be more curious?
Mm,
Because curiosity leads to finding a voice. And when you're curious, your tone tends to be spot on. I would absolutely ask yourself, what does it mean to me to be impactful in my career or at home, but for the purposes of this conversation, in my career? Who in my life is my confidential partner? Or who in my life could be my
mm.
confidential partner? So those are three questions more than three hard and fast, here's what I want you to do. But if you answer those three questions, you'll get to my advice. Be more curious. Know what impact means for you, and get somebody in your life who can give you good, sound advice when you need it.
Said like a true coach. Love it. Absolutely love it. Really good. Corinne, I've really loved meeting you and talking to you today. I'm sure there are people listening that will want to find out a bit more about you, track you down. Where should they go looking? Where can they find you?
Yeah. Thank you. It's been my pleasure to be here today, Andy. I have thoroughly enjoyed our conversation and meeting you. It's been one of the best opportunities I think I've had. I just really felt a connection with talking with you, and I think we unveiled some great things today. So thank you for the opportunity. People can find me on LinkedIn at Corinne Gavlinski. They can also email me at corinne@thegavgroup.com. And certainly you can find me at thegavgroup.com also, which is my website.
Beautiful. Beautiful stuff. Well, we'll put all of that information in the show notes, and just leaves me saying thank you so much for being so generous with your time. And I've really enjoyed this conversation, and I look forward to our next meeting.
As well as do I. Thank you so much, Andy. Take care.
And you take care. Okay, everyone, that was Corinne Gavlinski. And if you'd like to find out a bit more about her or any of the things we've talked about in today's show, please check out the show notes. So, that concludes today's episode. I hope you've enjoyed it, found it interesting, and heard something maybe that will help you become a stickier, more successful business from the inside going forward. If you have, please like, comment, and subscribe. It really helps. I'm Andy Goram, and you've been listening to the Sticky from the Inside podcast. Until next time, thanks for listening.